Hello, my name is Dave Pollard and I am the Education Outreach Manager at Spaceport Cornwall. Today I'm going to be telling you about the first ever launch from the UK, which is due to take place at Spaceport Cornwall this summer, why it's happening, and also where the opportunities there are for you to get involved in the space sector in the future. So at Spaceport Cornwall, we're a fairly small team. This is the team on screen here, but this is set to grow after we've had the first launch from the UK and as we're developing the cluster in Cornwall further. So what's happening in the UK? In the UK, there are a number of different launch sites that have been identified. So you have us in Cornwall, and we're looking at a horizontal launch working with Virgin Orbit. And then you've got Shetland and Sutherland in Scotland, and they're likely to launch next year, and they're vertical launch facilities, one which is privately funded and one which is predominantly government funded. Then we have Prestwick, which is another horizontal launch player, and then there's another couple of sites who are looking at balloon launch or launch from a pad out to sea. So some quite novel approaches to launching from the UK. And like I say, we've never launched a satellite or a rocket from UK soil. So it's a pretty massive time for the UK space sector. I'm now going to show you a quick video, and then I'll explain why that's particularly important to us after the video.
Elsie, this is LD in control room. We are currently on track for our nominal timeline, and our current drop time as listed in Trillion is 19:25 UTC.
Planet controller and flight crew has been boarded the aircraft.
Cosmic Girl, this is Orbit Base. You are go for takeoff.
Copy, go for takeoff.
Altitude 3000.
And Orbit Base, Cosmic Girl is starting the turn to the inbound. Pulling now. Pull.
Pulling.
Release.
Release, release, release.
Release.
EST's ignited.
Confirm Newton 3 engine startup.
Max Alpha achieved.
TBC's in first stage looking good.
We had a pretty awesome view up here.
Max Q Alpha achieved.
Stage 1 burn nominal.
Stage set, brake wires broken.
Newton 4 startup complete.
Recovered, and we are now returning to base.
Bearing, brake wires broken.
Motion 1's in space. Sounds like the blue skies went to black.
This is Radiohead on control. Mauritius has confirmed acquisition. Payload separation confirmed.
Virgin Orbit's first successful test launch that they did in the US in January 2021. And the reason that's really important to us is because that's the exact same technology that they're going to be bringing to Spaceport Cornwall to launch from the UK this summer. So as you can see, that's a horizontal launch provider. That's taken about 10 years for them to develop that. And the plane that you see there is a Boeing 747 called Cosmic Girl. And Cosmic Girl is a plane that used to be a Virgin Atlantic plane, so it would have taken people on their long haul holidays, possibly from the UK to the US in the past. And then they've retrofitted that to fit the rocket under the wing, so they're now able to launch that rocket into space. And it's in the nose cone of that rocket where there are the satellites, the payloads, that then get released out into space. I've now got another short video to show you about who we are at Spaceport Cornwall and what we're planning to do. hopefully that gives you a bit more information about who we are at Spaceport Cornwall, and this is what we're super excited to see this summer. So you may be wondering, why is all of this happening? You may have seen more about sort of satellite launch in the news recently, whether that's through Virgin or SpaceX, or some of the other companies like Rocket Lab, which is based in New Zealand. And the reason for this is because space is changing. We're moving away from a government-led space sector to a commercially led space sector. And this is evident in this next graph. So this graph shows launches from the first launch in 1957 of Sputnik right up to sort of present day. And all of those above the line are government-led launches. All of those below the line are commercially led launches. And you can see that since the 1980s, when the first commercial launches have come in, there's been a decent growth in commercial launch services, and there's been a decline in launches by government-led organisations. And that's because commercial launchers are able to take more risk, they're able to be a bit smaller, able to move faster, and they're launching more and more regularly, and governments are actually paying for some of those commercial providers to carry some of the payloads that the governments want to have. And I think over the next few decades, we're likely to see the commercial launch market increase even more and the government-led market decrease slightly, and maybe with the government-led market focusing more on sort of space exploration, the next moon landings, looking at Mars, things like that, rather than the launches of satellites. But another reason why you're seeing more and more about satellite launch is because the cost of satellite launch is coming down greatly. And the reason for this is because the size of the technology is coming down. So back in the sort of 70s, 80s, some of the satellites launched would have been the size of a small car or a small bus on the left-hand side of the screen. Now you can get satellites which are smaller than your lunchbox. So this is a 10-inch by 10-inch CubeSat. And the expectation is that we're going to need another 32,000 of these in orbit by 2030 to provide us with what we need. And we've got 4 different types of orbit around the Earth. And we've got HEO, which stands for high Earth orbit. We've got MEO, which stands for mid-Earth orbit. We've got GEO, which stands for geostationary or geosynchronous Earth orbit. And this is a really important orbit because satellites that are launched in this orbit will rotate around the Earth at exactly the same speed as the Earth rotates. So if you've got a Goonhilly satellite dish, receiver dish, for instance, pointing up at a geostationary satellite, that data, that downlink from that satellite to that dish can be constant. So satellites in this orbit are particularly good for things like constant communication or looking at weather, because of how high they are up in orbit. They're able to sort of cover about a third of the planet with their coverage. So by sort of predicting the weather, they're able to also send that communication straight back down to Earth on a really consistent basis. But the orbit that we're going to be launching into at Spaceport with Virgin is LEO, which stands for low Earth orbit. And low Earth orbit can be less than 2,000 kilometers, but can be as low as 160 kilometers. And if you've ever looked up in the sky and seen the International Space Station go over overhead, that is an example of a low Earth orbit satellite. And low Earth orbit satellites are particularly good for things like low Earth observation, so taking really detailed images of our planet, but also for things like fast communication. Because they're not as high up in orbit, we're able to get communication up to those satellites and back down to Earth at a much faster rate than if they were in a higher orbit. Demand for satellite data is growing in regards to tracking, monitoring and observing. If we're moving towards smart cities where we're using renewable energies, we need satellite data to supplement this area. These are some of the examples of where satellite data can be used. So in a huge array of different sectors, whether that's farming or fishing, or people transportation, environment, mining, satellite data is used in almost every sector, and it's hard to get away from. I just don't think we have a true understanding of how often we use satellite data as a population. We've got a couple of specific examples here now. So satellite data in agri-tech is growing. So this is an example of using satellite data to take detailed images of a farmer's fields. And by taking those images, we're able to see whether specific areas of those fields may need some focus. So if they're planting something that is green, they're able to use satellite data to tell whether the fields are sort of a universal colour throughout. Whereas if there are some areas that aren't as green as the rest of the field, that can indicate then to the farmer that they need to focus on that specific area. So maybe looking to use more pesticides or more fertilizer on that specific area, rather than using pesticides and fertilizer on the entire field. And that can save time, it can increase crop levels, and be really good in regards to sort of control of disease and pests in that field area. Another area where we use satellite data a lot is in regards to monitoring the environment. So this is a satellite called Sentinel 5P, and this has been launched to look at the nitrogen dioxide levels across the UK. So you can see the areas of red there is where there's high areas of nitrogen dioxide, and up in the top right hand corner is the day of the week. So we're looking now at an entire week over in the UK. So you can see from sort of Monday to Friday, there's quite high levels of red in the city areas of London, Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham. And at the weekend, it drops off. And on Sunday, it nearly drops off entirely. So from this, we could think that it's people commuting, travelling to work, travelling to school, which is having that impact, that area of red there over the sort of Monday to Friday period. And it's going to be really interesting with COVID, with people working from home, with people studying from home, to see what impact that has had on the nitrogen dioxide levels, especially across that Monday to Friday time period. But it's only by using satellite data that we're able to get that true picture of an entire country or even an entire continent in regards to those levels. So what is the opportunity? So the UK government has targeted, the UK was capturing 10% of the global £400 billion space economy by 2030. We currently manufacture a large proportion of the world's small satellites in the UK, but we currently have to ship them all abroad to launch. By having launch here as well, we're adding to that sort of puzzle piece to make the UK a strong powerhouse in regards to the space sector. And the launch market is said to be worth £10 billion over the next decade. In Cornwall, we're going to be having 150 direct jobs through the spaceport, with 240 in the supply chain. We're looking at £240 million economic growth for Cornwall, the opportunity to inspire a generation, which we're really passionate about, and to take a global lead in sustainable space. So on that last point about sustainable space, we're the first spaceport in the world to have carried out a full carbon impact report, and we're carrying out an environmental impact assessment as well, to really monitor what impact our activities as a spaceport are having and how we can reduce those as much as possible, but also mitigate those where we can. In regards to responsible launch, I mentioned earlier about satellites being really important to monitoring the environment. The images here are of Italy, the two images side by side. One was pre-COVID, and this was looking at carbon dioxide levels. So the one on the left is pre-COVID, the one on the right is during COVID. And these two images went viral in Italy during COVID, highlighting the difference between the two. And these two images have actually led to policy change in some of the city areas in Italy to reduce their carbon dioxide levels post-COVID. So I think that shows how powerful images from space and monitoring the environment from space can be. So what's the opportunity for you? Talking about jobs in the future in regards to the space sector across the UK, and not so much astronaut, that's Tim Peake on one side of this page, more things on the other side of this page. So things like spaceport operations, spaceplane and rocket systems, payload integration, so they're the people that will handle the satellites and put those satellites into the rockets, propulsion systems, so they're looking at how we get those rockets into space, how much fuel is needed, what types of fuel. Things like aerospace engineers, engineers are in short supply in many of the sectors across the UK, no different in the space sector. We need people to look at problems, work out how to change those problems, how to fix those problems, how to build the things that are going up into space, like the rockets and the satellites, and have those sort of creative abilities at the same time. So if you really like sort of pulling things apart, putting things together, looking at things and thinking about how you might improve them, you know, engineering might be a really good area for you. Also an area of opportunity is that downstream application development. So we're launching all of these satellites into space. These satellites are sending back heaps of data. How do we change that data into sort of numbers and figures that come back down into something usable by an end user, whether that's a farmer or a fisherman or just the general public like you and I, with an app that we can download on our phone? You know, that's where I think a lot of the next millionaires are going to be made, is people who can use that data coming down from space in a new and novel way. So if you're interested in that side, that's definitely something to look at. I thought I'd just touch on routes and some tips before we finish. So routes, there are some apprenticeships that are starting across the UK now. So there's a space engineering technician apprenticeship that's been started in the Leicester region, and we're going to be offering it in Cornwall from this summer. But still a very common route into the sector is through degrees, and UCAS website there, that advertises all of the 37,000 unique courses that you can study at university. So I thought I'd look at some of the space ones. So we've got things like aerospace engineering and a huge range, you know, 3 years or 4 years, and some of those 4 years might include a year out in industry or a year abroad. And it's really important to look at the modules of all of these to see whether those modules are something that you're interested in. Things like space science and robotics. So robotics is a really growing field, both on the ground, so building things on the ground using robots, but also in space, so in orbit manufacture, and how we're using robots to manufacture, whether that be on a satellite or whether that be on another place like the moon. Things like aerospace engineering and space technology. And then more on the downstream side, you've got things like web and mobile app development, if you're interested in using that space data that's coming down. I always say to students, you know, try and find an end goal and work backwards. You know, have a look at some of the websites. So spacecareers.uk is a really good website for advertising job vacancies, and you could look at the job vacancies on there and work backwards, work out what skills, what experience, what qualifications you would need to get a job like that in the future, and that can hopefully help shape you in the next sort of few years as you continue your study. A few last tips from me before I go. Spacecareers.uk, really good website, take a look at it. Choose appropriate courses now that can help you in the future. Engage, so that's, you know, engage with businesses, follow businesses on social media, take part in as many extracurricular activities that you can take part in. I think the space sector is really good for offering extracurricular activities, and some of those activities can lead to really, really big things. I've just come back from the screening of the Buzz Lightyear film, where we've taken a number of students who entered one of our competitions, and they've actually got to interview Chris Evans, Tim Peake, and some of the other stars of the Buzz Lightyear film. We didn't know that when we started that competition, but that's the sort of thing that you can get involved in if you take part in some of those competitions that businesses and the UK Space Agency offer. I've put the UK Space Agency Space Placements in Industry on there, so SPIN. This is something you can do if you go to university. You can apply to take part in a SPIN programme, and that's where you become an intern at a different space company. And the UK Space Agency actually funds those SPIN term placements. You work for that company for two months, and you know, a real job can come out at the end of that, and at worst you're going to get incredible experience working with those organisations. So look at that, really competitive but really great programme. And then if you're interested in sort of that entrepreneurial side, we need new businesses in the space sector to set up. You know, it's a really fast growing sector, and we need other organisations to set up and have a niche focusing on space. That's it from me. I think I may have overrun ever so slightly, but I hope you've enjoyed that today. I hope you've learned something about launch from the UK, and you're excited to follow us as we head towards launch this summer. Follow us on social media and to be kept up to date with all of the developments and how you can sort of get involved and watch that first ever launch. Thanks so much for having me on. I hope you have a great rest of your day and you've enjoyed this presentation.